The day had started like any other, with the soft hum of the heater and the gentle clink of Robert's coffee mug against the kitchen counter. He moved through his morning routine with the practiced ease of a man who'd lived alone for years, the house echoing with the kind of silence that only comes after the children have grown and gone. It wasn't until he glanced at the blinking light on the security monitor in the hallway that he remembered he'd finally called a technician to fix the old camera above the garage, the one that had been out for months. He'd meant to tell his son-in-law Greg, who often parked there when he and Robert's daughter Anna came to visit. But the days had slipped by, and the words had never left his lips. Now, as he scrolled through the footage, Robert expected nothing more than a few shots of squirrels or the neighbor's cat. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. The screen flickered to life, showing Greg and Anna standing in the driveway, their voices muffled but their body language unmistakable, tense, furtive, as if they were sharing a secret they hoped the world would never hear. Robert leaned closer, his heart pounding. Greg pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, unmarked envelope, and handed it to Anna, who glanced nervously at the house before tucking it into her purse. They spoke in hurried whispers, their faces pale in the winter light. Robert's mind raced. What could they possibly be hiding? He rewound the footage, watching as Greg checked the camera, clearly believing it was still broken, before gesturing for Anna to follow him around the side of the house. The next 10 minutes were a blur of movement, Greg slipping into the garage, Anna keeping watch, the two of them moving with a purpose that sent a chill down Robert's spine. He watched as Greg opened the locked cabinet where Robert kept his important documents, rifling through folders until he found what he was looking for. Anna stood by the door, her eyes darting nervously. When Greg emerged, he was holding a stack of papers. Robert's will, his bank statements, the deed to the house. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He watched, horrified, as Greg snapped photos of each page with his phone, then carefully returned everything to its place. Anna wiped her brow, relief flooding her face as they hurried back to the car. Robert sat frozen, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. He had trusted Greg, welcomed him into the family, given him the keys to his home. Now the evidence of their deceit was right in front of him, undeniable and damning. He felt a surge of anger, sharper than anything he'd known in years, but before he could process what he'd seen, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered, his voice shaking. On the other end was a police officer. "Mr. Evans, this is Officer Ramirez. I need you to stay inside and lock your doors. There's been a break-in reported in your neighborhood, and we believe your property may be involved." Robert's mind reeled. 10 minutes after he'd watched Greg and Anna's secret unfold, the worst had happened. The world outside his window was suddenly full of danger, and the people he loved most were at the center of it all. As he locked the doors and drew the curtains, Robert realized that nothing in his life would ever be the same. The camera had revealed a dark secret, but it was only the beginning. The real story, the one that would test his faith, his courage, and his very sense of self, was just beginning to unfold. Robert's hands trembled as he locked the front door, the officer's warning echoing in his ears, and the images from the security footage replaying in his mind like a nightmare on loop. He moved through the house in a daze, every shadow suddenly suspect, every creak of the old floorboards a possible threat. The police were on their way, but Robert couldn't sit still. He returned to the monitor, his heart pounding, and scrolled back through the footage, desperate to understand what Greg and Anna had been doing, what they could possibly want with his will, his bank statements, the deed to the house. He watched the scene again, this time noticing details he'd missed in his initial shock. The way Anna kept glancing at her phone, the way Greg seemed to be timing their movements, the urgency in their whispered conversation. Then, as he fast-forwarded through the next few minutes, something else caught his eye. A flash of movement in the backyard, just beyond the reach of the garage camera. Robert switched to the back porch feed, recently repaired but rarely checked, and his blood ran cold. There, in the grainy black and white footage, was Greg, alone this time, digging near the old rosebush that had been Linda's pride and joy. He watched as Greg pulled a small metal box from his coat, buried it in the dirt, and carefully covered it with leaves and soil. Robert's mind raced. What was in the box? Why hide it in his yard? He rewound the footage, watching Greg's face, tense, furtive, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to be caught at any moment. The timestamp showed it was just minutes before the break-in call from Officer Ramirez. Robert's heart hammered in his chest as he realized the truth. Greg and Anna hadn't just been snooping, they were setting him up. The break-in wasn't random. It was a cover, a distraction, or maybe even a way to make Robert look unstable or calm, as he thought of the recent arguments with Anna about the house, the way Greg had pushed him to sign new documents for his own protection, the sudden interest in his health and finances. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening certainty. Robert's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Anna. "Dad, are you okay? We heard about the break-in. Please call us." The words felt like poison. He didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed his coat and a flashlight, his breath fogging in the cold air as he stepped into the backyard. The rose bushes were brittle with frost, the ground hard but not yet frozen. He knelt where he'd seen Greg digging, his fingers numb as he brushed away the leaves and scraped at the dirt. After a few minutes, his hand struck metal. He pulled out the box, heart pounding, and carried it inside. At the kitchen table, he pried it open with a butter knife, his hands shaking. Inside were copies of his will, his bank statements, and a burner phone. It screened dark, but when he powered it on, he saw a series of texts between Greg and an unknown number, discussing the plan, the old man's meds, and making sure the paperwork is ready. Robert's vision swam. The betrayal was deeper than he'd feared. Not only had Greg and Anna been stealing from him, they were plotting something far worse, something that could ruin him, or worse. As the sound of sirens approached, Robert realized he was standing at the edge of a precipice. The camera had revealed a dark secret, but the true danger was only just beginning to surface. He braced himself for the police, for the questions, for the storm that was about to break over his quiet life. And as he looked at the evidence in his hands, Robert made a silent vow he would not be a victim. He would fight for the truth, for his dignity, and for the family he thought he'd lost. The next move was his. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser painted the snow in streaks of color as Robert opened the door, the cold air biting at his face. Officer Ramirez and his partner stepped inside, their boots leaving wet prints on the entryway tile. Robert's hands were still shaking as he led them to the kitchen, where the metal box, the burner phone, and the stack of copied documents sat in a neat, damning pile. He explained everything: the technician's visit, the repaired camera, the footage of Greg and Anna, the break-in call, and the discovery in the backyard. Ramirez listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the texts on the burner phone. "You did the right thing, Mr. Evans," he said, his tone both reassuring and grave. "This isn't just a family dispute. This is fraud, maybe even conspiracy." The second officer took photos of the evidence, bagging each item with careful hands. "We'll need to take your statement and get a copy of the footage," Ramirez continued, "and I'd recommend you don't contact your daughter or son-in-law until we know more." Robert nodded, the reality of the situation settling over him like a heavy blanket. He felt both exposed and vindicated, the pain of betrayal warring with the relief of finally being believed. As the officers worked, Robert's phone buzzed again. Another message from Anna, this one more frantic. "Dad, please, we need to talk. Something's happened." He ignored it, focusing instead on the questions the officers asked, recounting every detail he could remember. Linda hovered in the doorway, her face pale but resolute, her presence a silent anchor. When the police left, promising to be in touch soon, Robert and Linda sat together at the kitchen table, the house suddenly feeling both safer and more vulnerable than ever. "What if they come back?" Linda whispered, her voice trembling. Robert squeezed her hand, his own, fear masked by a determination he hadn't felt in years. "We'll be ready," he said. That night, sleep was elusive. Robert replayed the footage over and over, searching for anything he might have missed. A license plate, a slip of the tongue, a look between Greg and Anna that might explain why they'd risked everything. He wondered if he'd ever really known his daughter, or if the years of distance and polite conversation had been a mask for something darker. The next morning, Officer Ramirez called with an update. "We traced the number on the burner phone. It's registered to a shell company, one we believe Greg's been using to move money. We're also looking into recent changes to your will and power of attorney. You're not the only one he's targeted, Mr. Evans." The word sent a chill through Robert, but also a spark of hope. He wasn't alone. The law was on his side, and for the first time he felt like he had a fighting chance. As he hung up, Linda hugged him tightly, her voice fierce. "We're going to get through this, Robert. We're not going to let them win." The battle lines were drawn, and as the winter sun rose over the quiet street, Robert knew that the real fight was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of police updates, legal paperwork, and a gnawing sense of dread that never quite left Robert's chest. He and Linda kept the curtains drawn and the doors locked, their world shrinking to the safe, familiar rooms of their home. Each morning, Robert checked his phone for messages from Officer Ramirez, hoping for news that Greg and Anna had been arrested, that the nightmare was finally over. Instead, the investigation seemed to grow more complicated with every passing day. The police uncovered a web of shell companies, forged signatures, and secret accounts. Evidence that Greg had been siphoning money not just from Robert, but from other vulnerable relatives as well. Anna's involvement was harder to pin down. She was careful, always one step removed, her name never appearing on any official documents. But the texts on the burner phone told a different story, one of whispered plans, coded messages, and a growing desperation as the walls closed in. Robert felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak as he read each new report. The daughter he'd loved, now a stranger, her loyalty sold for a handful of stolen dollars. Then one evening, as Linda was making tea and Robert was reviewing the latest police email, the doorbell rang. He froze, every muscle tensing. Linda peeked through the window and gasped. "It's Anna. She's alone." Robert hesitated, then opened the door, his heart pounding. Anna stood on the porch, her eyes red and swollen, her hands twisting nervously. "Dad, please, I need to talk to you. Greg's gone. He took everything. I didn't know what he was planning, I swear." Robert studied her face, searching for the truth. She stepped inside, her voice trembling as she confessed to everything. How Greg had manipulated her, how he'd convinced her to help him access Robert's accounts, how she'd been too afraid to say no. He said if I didn't help, he'd leave me. "I was scared, Dad. I thought I could fix it before you found out." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she begged for forgiveness, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. Robert felt a surge of anger, but also a deep, aching sadness. He wanted to believe her, to reach out and pull her into an embrace, but the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Linda stood beside him, her face unreadable. "You need to go to the police, Anna. Tell them everything. It's the only way." Anna nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I will. I promise." As she left, Robert watched her walk down the driveway, her figure small and fragile against the winter night. He closed the door, his heart heavy but his resolve unbroken. The truth was out, but the cost had been higher than he'd ever imagined. As he sat with Linda by the fire, the house quiet around them, Robert realized that the real battle was not just for justice, but for forgiveness, and that some wounds might never fully heal. But as the flames flickered and the night deepened, he also knew that he had done the right thing. He had chosen truth over comfort, dignity over denial, and in doing so had reclaimed his life from the shadows of betrayal. The next morning, the house was filled with a tense, expectant quiet, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Robert and Linda sat at the kitchen table, the remains of breakfast untouched between them, their eyes fixed on the phone. Anna had left the night before, promising to go to the police, to tell the truth, to finally break free from Greg's grip. Robert wanted to believe her, but years of disappointment and heartbreak made hope feel dangerous. When the call finally came, it was Officer Ramirez. "Mr. Evans, your daughter came in this morning. She gave a full statement. We've issued a warrant for Greg's arrest, and with her testimony and your evidence, we have a strong case." Relief washed over Robert, but it was tinged with sorrow. He thanked the officer, hung up, and sat in silence, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him. Linda reached across the table, her hand warm and steady. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "We both did." Robert nodded, but his mind was a storm of memories, of Anna as a child, of Greg's easy charm, of the slow, insidious way trust had been eroded until only suspicion remained. He wondered if forgiveness was possible, if the wounds in their family could ever truly heal. That afternoon, Anna called from the police station. Her voice was small but clear. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me." Robert's throat tightened. "I want to, Anna. I really do. But it's going to take time." She began to cry, and for the first time in years, Robert let himself cry too. Not just for what had been lost, but for the hope that something new might grow in its place. The next day, the police found Greg hiding in a motel on the edge of town. The arrest made the local news, and suddenly Robert's quiet life was thrust into the spotlight. Neighbors stopped by with cases, Sorolas and awkward sympathy, friends called to offer support, and the senior center buzzed with gossip. Through it all, Robert kept his focus on the essentials: his health, his marriage, and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust with Anna. He visited her at the police station, their conversations tentative but honest, each one a small step toward healing. Linda joined them, her presence a bridge between father and daughter, her forgiveness offered freely, her love unwavering. As the days passed, Robert realized that the real test was not in the courtroom, but in the choices they made every day. To be honest, to be kind, to try again. The scars of betrayal would never fully disappear, but they could become part of a new story, one defined not by pain, but by the courage to forgive. As he sat on the porch one evening, the sun setting in a blaze of gold and crimson, Robert felt a sense of peace settle over him. The worst had happened, but they had survived. And in that survival, he found the strength to hope for something better. The weeks that followed Greg's arrest and Anna's confession were a strange blend of relief and rawness, as if the house itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Franklin Hayes found himself moving through the days with a new kind of caution, as if every step might uncover another hidden fault line in the life he'd built. The media attention faded quickly, replaced by the steady rhythm of neighbors returning to their routines, but the echoes of betrayal lingered in every corner of the home. Anna was released on bail, her visits tentative at first, each one a test of boundaries and forgiveness. She came for dinner, her eyes downcast, her voice softer than Franklin remembered. They spoke of small things, weather, recipes, the garden, but beneath every word was the unspoken question, can we ever be a family again? Linda, ever the peacemaker, welcomed Anna with open arms, her forgiveness a balm that soothed even Franklin's deepest wounds. Greg, meanwhile, remained in custody, his name now a byword for greed and manipulation in the local papers. Franklin followed the case from a distance, reading the updates with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. He knew that justice was being served, but he also mourned the years lost to suspicion and fear. The senior center became Franklin's sanctuary, a place where he could share his story without judgment, where others nodded in understanding and offered their own tales of betrayal and resilience. He started a small support group, and the circle grew quickly, men and women who had been hurt by those they loved, each one searching for a way to move forward. Franklin found purpose in these meetings, his gentle wisdom and quiet humor helping others find their footing. At home, he and Anna began the slow work of rebuilding trust. They walked in the garden together, planting new flowers where the old ones had withered, their conversations growing deeper with each passing day. Anna apologized again and again, her remorse genuine, her determination to make amends clear. Franklin listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears, but always with an open heart. He realized that the greatest revenge was not in retribution, but in the quiet, steady work of reclaiming joy and dignity. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined him. Instead, Franklin chose to remember the lessons learned, that boundaries are a gift, that dignity is worth fighting for, and that family at its best is a place where even the deepest wounds can be healed. As summer turned the garden to gold and green, Franklin sat on the porch with Linda and Anna, the air filled with laughter and the scent of honeysuckle, and felt a peace deeper than any he had ever known. The worst had happened, but they had survived. And in that survival, Franklin found the strength to hope for something better. As the weeks melted into months, Franklin Hayes found himself waking each morning with a cautious optimism, the kind that comes not from forgetting the past, but from learning to live alongside it. The garden flourished under his care, each new bloom a small act of hope, a reminder that beauty could return even after the harshest winter. Anna visited more often, her steps lighter, her laughter returning in hesitant bursts that grew stronger with each passing day. She threw herself into community service, volunteering at the local food bank and helping Franklin with the support group at the senior center. Together, they listened to stories of loss and redemption, their own wounds slowly knitting closed as they helped others find their footing. Linda watched them with quiet pride, her heart full as she saw the family she'd feared was lost forever begin to heal. The house, once heavy with suspicion and regret, now echoed with the sounds of life. Pots clanging in the kitchen, music drifting from the radio, the low murmur of conversation late into the night. Franklin and Anna spent long evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, their words weaving a new tapestry of trust and understanding. Sometimes they spoke of Greg, his trial looming on the horizon, his absence a shadow that lingered at the edges of their happiness. Anna expressed her remorse again and again, her determination to make amends unwavering. Franklin listened, his forgiveness not a single act but a daily choice, a quiet strength that anchored them both. He realized that true healing was not about erasing the past, but about choosing to live fully in the present, to savor the warmth of the sun on his face, the taste of fresh tomatoes from the garden, the sound of Anna's laughter mingling with Linda's. The support group thrived, drawing new members who came with their own stories of betrayal and resilience. Franklin's gentle wisdom and steady presence became a beacon for those still struggling to find their way. He found joy in these gatherings, his own pain transformed into compassion, his scars a testament to the possibility of renewal. As summer deepened and the world outside burst into color, Franklin felt a peace settle over him. A peace born not of forgetting, but of forgiving, of choosing to hope, and of building something new from the ashes of what had been lost. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, Franklin believed that happiness was not just possible, but inevitable, if only he had the courage to reach for it. The day of Greg's trial arrived with a storm that seemed to mirror the turmoil in Franklin Hayes's heart. Rain lashed the courthouse steps as Franklin and Anna hurried inside, their umbrellas battered by the wind, their nerves stretched thin. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to Franklin in years, all drawn by the promise of scandal and the hope of closure. Greg sat at the defendant's table, his once confident posture now hunched, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He looked nothing like the man who had charmed his way into Franklin's family, nothing like the son-in-law who had once called him Dad. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor laid out the evidence with chilling precision. The security footage of Greg rifling through Franklin's private files, the burner phone with its damning texts, the forged documents, and the testimony of Anna, who took the stand with trembling hands and a voice that grew stronger with every word. "He told me it was just a precaution," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "He said we needed to protect ourselves, but I didn't know how far he'd go. I didn't know he'd try to ruin my father." The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor played the footage of Greg burying the metal box in the garden, the images flickering across the screen like a nightmare made real. Franklin watched, his stomach twisting, as Greg's lawyer tried to spin a story of desperation and misunderstanding, painting Greg as a victim of circumstance. But the evidence was overwhelming, and when Franklin was called to the stand, he spoke with a calm, quiet fury that left no doubt about the truth. "I trusted him," Franklin said, his voice steady. "I gave him everything. My home, my trust, my family, and he tried to take it all away." The jury listened, rapt, as Franklin described the moment he discovered the outrage, the fear that gripped him as he realized the depth of Greg's betrayal, the heartbreak of watching his own daughter caught in the web. The defense tried to rattle him, but Franklin stood firm, his dignity unshaken. The most shocking moment came when the prosecutor revealed a final piece of evidence. A second burner phone found in Greg's car containing messages that hinted at an even darker plan, one that involved not just financial ruin but a staged accident meant to make Franklin's death look like a tragic fall down the basement stairs. Gasps rippled through the courtroom and Greg's face went white as the prosecutor read the messages aloud. "If the old man won't sign, we'll make it look like an accident. Anna will back me up." Anna sobbed, burying her face in her hands, and Franklin felt a cold, electric shock run through him. The betrayal was deeper than he'd ever imagined, the danger closer than he'd dared to fear. The judge called for order, her gavel ringing out like thunder. As the trial drew to a close, the jury's verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Greg was led away in handcuffs, his eyes hollow, his future shattered. Franklin sat in stunned silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He looked at Anna, her face streaked with tears, and realized that the worst had truly happened, but so had the best. The truth was out. Justice had been served, and for the first time in years, Franklin felt the possibility of peace. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within had finally broken, leaving behind a world washed clean and ready for something new. The courthouse emptied slowly, the echo of the judge's gavel still ringing in Franklin Hayes's ears as he stepped out into the rain-soaked street, Anna at his side. The world outside felt changed, as if the storm had washed away not just the grime from the sidewalks, but the last illusions Franklin had clung to about his family. Reporters called his name, their cameras flashing, but he ignored them, his mind replaying the trial's most shocking moments, the second burner phone, the messages about a staged accident, the look of utter defeat on Greg's face as the verdict was read. Anna walked in silence, her shoulders hunched, her eyes red from crying. They reached the car, and for a long moment neither spoke. Franklin finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "I never thought it would come to this, Anna. I never thought I'd see the day when my own family would—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Anna shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have stopped him. I should have told you sooner." Franklin looked at her, searching her face for the daughter he remembered. The little girl who used to run to him with scraped knees and wild stories, the young woman who had once promised she'd never let anyone hurt him. He saw guilt, fear, but also a flicker of hope. "You did the right thing in the end," he said quietly. "That's what matters now." The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past the windows. When they arrived, Linda was waiting, her arms open, her face etched with worry and relief. The three of them sat together in the living room, the house feeling both emptier and more full than it had in years. Anna told them everything: how Greg had manipulated her, how he'd threatened her, how she'd been too afraid to ask for help until it was almost too late. Franklin listened, his anger slowly giving way to a deep, aching sadness. He realized that the wounds Greg had inflicted would take years to heal, if they ever did. The community's reaction was swift and divided. Some neighbors brought casseroles and kind words, others crossed the street to avoid him, their eyes full of judgment or pity. The senior center support group rallied around Franklin, their stories of betrayal and resilience echoing his own. He found comfort in their company. Their laughter and tears a reminder that he was not alone. But at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside was dark, Franklin lay awake, haunted by the knowledge that the greatest danger had come not from strangers, but from within his own family. He wondered if he could ever truly forgive Anna, if he could ever trust again. Yet as the days passed and the wounds began to scab over, Franklin found himself reaching for hope. He started to rebuild, not just the house, but the fragile bonds of trust and love that had survived the storm. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, he believed that healing was possible. The worst had happened, but he was still standing. And in that survival, Franklin discovered a strength he never knew he had. The days after the trial settled into a strange, uneasy calm, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if the peace would last. Franklin Hayes tried to fill the silence with routine, tending the garden, reading the paper, helping Linda with chores, but the echoes of the courtroom and the weight of all that had been lost lingered in every corner. Anna stayed with them, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the pain they were all trying to move past. She threw herself into rebuilding trust, helping around the house, volunteering at the senior center, and joining Franklin for long walks where they spoke of everything except the past. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, as Franklin was pruning the rose bushes, that a car pulled up to the curb. A man stepped out, tall, with a weathered face and a cautious smile. He introduced himself as Detective Harris, the lead investigator on Greg's case. "Mr. Hayes, I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice gentle. "I wanted to thank you for your courage, and to let you know there's something you should see." Franklin led him inside, Linda and Anna joining them in the living room. Harris placed a small envelope on the table. "We found this in Greg's safe deposit box. It's addressed to you." Franklin's hands shook as he opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter was written in Greg's handwriting, the words uneven, desperate. "Franklin, if you're reading this, it means I've lost. I never wanted to hurt you or Anna. I was drowning in debt, and I made terrible choices. I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope you'll take care of her. She's stronger than she knows. I'm sorry." The photograph was of Anna as a child, sitting on Greg's shoulders, both of them laughing in the sunlight. Anna burst into tears, and Linda wrapped her in a tight embrace. Franklin stared. And at the letter, his emotions a storm of anger, grief, and something like pity. He was a coward, Franklin said quietly, but he was still family. Harris nodded, his eyes kind. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But you did the right thing, Mr. Hayes. You protected your family. After the detective left, the house was quiet again, but the silence felt different, less like a wound, more like a space waiting to be filled. That night, Franklin sat on the porch, the letter in his lap, the stars bright above. He realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward, to let go of the anger that threatened to consume him. Anna joined him, her head resting on his shoulder, and together they watched the night deepen, the pain of the past slowly giving way to the hope of a new beginning. The visitor had brought closure, but also a reminder. The future was theirs to shape, if only they had the courage to claim it. The days that followed Detective Harris's visit were filled with a cautious optimism, as if the house itself was learning to breathe again. Anna, still raw from the trial and Greg's final letter, began to find her footing, her laughter returning in small, tentative bursts that made Linda smile and Franklin's heart ache with hope. The three of them fell into a gentle rhythm, shared meals, long walks, evenings spent reading or watching old movies. Yet beneath the surface, Franklin sensed a tension, a question that lingered in every quiet moment. Could they truly move forward, or would the scars of betrayal always keep them apart? The answer came unexpectedly one Saturday morning when Anna approached Franklin in the garden, her hands full of fresh-picked tomatoes. "Dad, there's something I need to show you," she said, her voice steady but her eyes shining with nerves. She led him to her car and opened the trunk, revealing a small, battered safe. "I found this in Greg's storage unit. I didn't want to open it alone." Together, they carried the safe inside, Linda joining them at the kitchen table. Franklin's hands shook as he turned the key Anna handed him. Inside were stacks of cash, a passport in Greg's name, and a folder labeled "For Anna." Anna opened the folder, her breath catching as she read the first page. It's a confession. Greg wrote down everything, how he planned to frame you, Dad, how he forged the documents, even how he tried to convince me to run away with him after the trial. Tears streamed down her face as she read Greg's final words. "Anna, I'm sorry. I was weak. I let fear and greed ruin everything. If you're reading this, I hope you can forgive me and yourself. Start over. Be better than I was." The room was silent, the weight of Greg's confession settling over them like a heavy blanket. Franklin reached for Anna's hand, his own eyes wet with tears. "You already are better, Anna. You chose the truth. You chose us." Linda hugged them both, her voice trembling with relief. "We're still a family. We always will be." In that moment, Franklin realized that the true test of love was not in the absence of pain, but in the willingness to forgive, to trust again, to build something new from the ruins of what had been lost. The safe, once a symbol of secrets and betrayal, now felt like a door opening to a future filled with possibility. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Franklin felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The final test had come, not in a courtroom, but in the quiet courage to let go of the past and embrace the uncertain, beautiful promise of tomorrow. Summer arrived in a gentle rush. sunlight pouring through the windows and filling the Hayes home with a warmth that felt earned, not given. The garden, once a place of secrets and suspicion, now bloomed with color. Roses, tomatoes, and wildflowers Anna and Linda planted together, their laughter rising above the hum of bees and the distant sound of children playing in the street. Franklin found himself waking each morning with a sense of gratitude, the ache of the past softened by the simple joys of the present. The support group at the senior center thrived, drawing new members who came with their own stories of loss and redemption. And Franklin's gentle wisdom became a beacon for those still struggling to find their way. He and Anna spent long afternoons tending the garden, their hands in the dirt, the silence between them comfortable and full of meaning. Sometimes they spoke of Greg, of the pain he'd caused, the choices he'd made, and the lessons they'd all learned. More often, though, they spoke of the future. Anna's plans to go back to school, Linda's dream of traveling, Franklin's hope that their family could become a place of healing, not hurt. The community, once a backdrop to their private struggles, now embraced them as a symbol of resilience and hope. Neighbors stopped by with pies and stories. The senior center hosted a celebration in Franklin's honor, and even the local paper ran a story about the Hayes family's journey from heartbreak to healing. On warm evenings, they gathered on the porch, the air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of cicadas, and Franklin would look around at the faces he loved and feel a peace deeper than any he had ever known. He realized that the greatest revenge was not in retribution, but in the courage to heal, to forgive, and to love again. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined him. Instead, Franklin chose to remember the lessons learned, that boundaries are a gift, that dignity is worth fighting for, and that family, at its best, is a place where even the deepest wounds can be healed. As the stars appeared overhead and the world grew quiet, Franklin closed his eyes, grateful for the journey and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that at last he was truly home.